Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Falby. I'm the facilitator for this session. Here's the very well-known Ellis Pratt. He's been involved in more documentation projects than most of us have had hot dinners. Ellis today is going to talk about documentation as an emotional experience for the user. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Ellis.
Thank you. I'm one of the directors and owners of Cherryleaf. We're a technical writing services company, so we write documentation for companies, we train technical authors, and we've got a recruitment side that places contract and permanent authors as well. So why consider emotions within documentation? Well, first off, if we look at what's happening within business, what we're seeing is emotion becoming a greater part of the strategy of companies anyway. And most companies don't want to be competing on cost. Companies looking to try and create added value or brand loyalty with their customers. And so they're trying to generate an emotional attachment. And even some of the most detested companies in the world are actually trying to position themselves as actually caring about their customers and trying to help. So it's an idea of trying to be more nurturing with your relationship between yourself and your customers. Part of the reason why this is changing is also because there's been a change in the relationship between companies and customers. Because now a lot of companies talk about stakeholders as though they are more than just customers, but they've got a contribution to make to it. And nowadays, if customers get bad service and if they want to complain, it's very easy for them to do that. They can go onto Twitter, they can use YouTube, Facebook, and if the service isn't good enough, they've now got the voice with the social media to let other people hear about it as well. What's also changed is that technology and the way we perceive technology has changed as well. In the old days, technology was scary and people were frightened that if they did something wrong, they would break it. And often that was the case. If they did something wrong, it would break. But now my son's just starting secondary school, and we went down to Asda and we picked up a phone for £15, and that came with a £5 phone credit. So we've got a piece of technology which costs 10 quid. Now if he can't use it or it's difficult to work, at £10 you can just throw it away and buy another phone that's better. So technology in many ways today has become mundane. It's not as important as part of our day-to-day lives. That change within business of being more nurturing and creating this emotional bond should also extend into the post-sales user documentation that we're providing at the moment. And we've had a standard for doing documentation that was set in the 1980s, which was very detached, very much like Mr. Spock, as it were. And part of what happens, we call it help. It's about when people fail, they go to documentation. So if we're going to a more nurturing approach, it's changing the mindset to being a more positive feeling. And if you look at what happens with customers, this is some research that we did and how they interact with technology and documentation. They get emotional with things. So this was something we did, and we turned it into an advert for YouTube. Take it in terms of, okay, what's in it for the business? One of the companies or organisations that has adopted this approach has been Firefox with their Sumo support line. And one of the things they've found from doing a change to a more emotional type of documentation, and we'll look at what they've done a little bit later, is it's actually resulted in a 13% increase in the amount of people reading the documentation, which to them equates to 800,000 extra readers per year. And if you think that that will probably lead to a reduction, if that sort of effect comes through in other organisations and leads to a reduction in support calls, and maybe it's 10%, it's actually quite a large number. If you think of the cost of support and actually going to your boss and saying, I've got a way of reducing support by 10%, then ears are going to prick up and people are going to be actually interested in what you do as a technical author and also interested in pursuing this route. But this idea of moving towards including emotion, we've seen from some of the e-learning presentations earlier, it's not only coming through in technical documentation, it's also coming through in e-learning as well. And what that is proposing is that if people are to remember stuff and to learn things in e-learning, then what actually makes them remember is actually their emotional state. And there are also the ideas of including emotion in design theory as well, coming through from about the 1990s. And they call it affective design. And the idea is that depending on a person's emotions, they will be attracted or repelled to different types of design, and that can also include different websites and the way in which they're laid out. So if you're in an anxious state, and you're in an anxious state, something's gone wrong, you're highly motivated to solve the problem, and you'll be attracted to dominant type things. If it's mundane, if they're just bored, then what they're actually more attracted to is more persuasive, submissive documentation, or information, I should say, or designs. So my argument is that if emotion's coming through in e-learning, if it's coming through in design and even websites, then it should do in user documentation as well. So what do we call it? If we've got from e-learning the affective context model, and from design and the affective e-learning, and from design affective design, what do you think we should call what we do? Affective writing or affective assistance, I think is a good enough title for that. Why shouldn't we do this? Why is this a bad idea? Well, it's back to this thing of anxiety again and what people are attracted to, and whether things are dangerous and scary and things go wrong if you do things wrong, then you shouldn't do that. And so if you've got a maintenance engineer on an aircraft, you want things to be clear and unambiguous because you don't want him to go wrong and the things to fall out, planes to fall out of the sky. So where safety is paramount, or where people might be anxious, or if it's dangerous if things go wrong, then the traditional approach, the same rules why we've gone with the way we go today, still apply. If you're talking about internal documentation and you have a hierarchical structure where it's command and control and the top tells the bottom what to do and there are no questions, then again, this dominant, unemotional approach is the best way to go. And if by being more emotional in the way in which we do things results in a loss of trust and credibility, then again, this approach is probably not the right thing to do. So I was talking about getting the tone wrong. That's a key part, as we can see from this. So getting the tone wrong, everyone know what that was from?
Hitchhiker's Guide.
Yeah, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I agree, if you're talking technical stuff to technical people, then again, the emotionally detached approach is probably the best way to go. But often what we're doing is we're trying to explain stuff to people that struggle with it. So let's decide that you think this is a good idea. How do you do it? Am I talking about making the text more emotional? Well, that's part of it, but that's not the be-all and end-all of affective assistance and the idea of affective design. But just to show you one example or two examples from companies that have done this route. One is a company called Mad Mimi, and this is a company that does service for sending out newsletters. So if you get our newsletter that goes out every month, it's actually being sent out from this web service. And this is the sort of help that they do. And I've highlighted some of the text, which is not what you'd normally see in a traditional help guide. And I was talking about sort of submissive text and more colloquial. So you've got things like, you could write, and to get fancy with this, and where it says. And then you've got this phrase at the bottom, you'll be golden. Now, I don't actually know what you'll be golden means. It could mean that you'll be brilliant. It could mean that you'll be happy, that you'll be successful. In the context of this, it actually doesn't matter. You sort of get the gist of what it's about. And in the tone of, and the user-friendliness of this thing, it sort of works. One aspect that will raise horrors for most technical authors is, what do you do about translation? How do you translate you'll be golden into Italian or into German and so forth like that? So as a strategy for this, in some ways you have to create it as a language of its own. But I mentioned Firefox and this Sumo website as well. And this is the before. And that's pretty much standard text that you'd see in most help files. Anything wrong with that? Most people think that's pretty good. So this is the after. And this, to most authors, they think is wrong. It's too chatty, it's too verbose, it's too long. But this is the text that's increased their users, the amount of people reading it and finding it useful, by 13%. So I think it's more about when and where content is provided. And in cars and design, we have this idea of surprise and delight. So if people get anxious and then they go to help, what if we preempt those problems? What if we have embedded help and give them guidance and suggestions before they get stuck? So I think actually it's more about usability testing and usability design and working out where people might get stuck and giving them the information beforehand. So I think it's more, the design side is more important. So we can take the concepts from effective design on how people react emotionally to different styles of information and products and take those into account when we're creating the documentation. Where I think there is the biggest change for what we will do in the future, and that's something called 3S model. And that is simulation. So that's showing people what's going to happen before they do it, which you can do with screencasts and videos. Stories. So you can give examples of what people have done to solve the problem and sort of help explain why you might do it or put things in context. And the third S is scenario. So it does mean changing the mindset of the way in which we write documentation as well. And our goal is to create with the users less this thing of solving the problem, but giving them more a sense of belonging to the product, belonging to the brand. So the ability to give people the opportunity to comment and feedback is part of this emotional element to it. People want to be heard, want to share. They spend all this time on Wikipedia and YouTube creating these things. Give them the opportunity to do that with your product as well. It's also about personalising the knowledge. So if we've got people in emotional states, they may be in different emotional states. Some people might be bored, some people might be really anxious, frustrated. We should be delivering different documents to meet those different emotional states, which means we need to be delivering more than one deliverable. And this again is preempting. If we can help somebody before they get stuck, then they'll be in a different emotional state to say how they are if they are stuck and they really know how to do it. And even perhaps make it fun. I don't know, who's seen this before? I wonder if you've seen this. So this is a user guide for a mobile phone. So that's not a dry manual. That is actually getting the person to participate and engage with what they're doing as they go along following the instructions. So it's actually sort of connecting the manual to the product itself. To summarise, what we've got going on is new economics coming through, where people are looking to create an emotional attachment between customers and their company and their brand. And if they're doing it in all the other bits of the business, why don't we do it with what we do as well? We can take the ideas from effective learning and design and apply them to user documentation. And as a name, I think effective writing or effective assistance is the good way to do it. What's probably going to change is being more aware of the context as to when people get stuck and adding in the 3 S's of scenario, stories, and simulation. And it's also, again, from the e-learning effective thing, putting caring at the centre of what we do. Looking to build confidence, inspire people, give them passion and motivated to do the product, to use the product. If you want to know more about this, one of the things we're planning to do is put together a workshop on how to create effective assistance. Subscribe to our newsletter and you'll find out as to what date we schedule for that.